I've never been afraid of driving at night. There's something oddly comforting about the empty roads, the hum of the engine, and the way the headlights cut through the darkness. But this drive was different. It wasn't one I had planned or wanted to take, yet I found myself behind the wheel, heading to a place I wasn't sure I wanted to go. The invitation came late in the evening. An old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, she wanted to meet up, catch up on life, and the place she suggested was an old diner on the outskirts of town. I hesitated at first, but the nagging curiosity got the best of me. After all, it had been years. I texted back a quick "sure, I'll see you there," and grabbed my keys, trying to ignore the unease building in my gut. The highway was long and winding, bordered by thick woods that seemed to swallow the light. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, another message from her. "It's really quiet out here. You'll like it." That feeling in my gut, the one telling me to turn back, was growing stronger, but I pushed it aside. After all, how bad could a late-night catch-up be? As the miles passed, I noticed something unsettling. There were no cars. Not a single vehicle had passed by in over 20 minutes. The further I drove, the darker it seemed to get. Even the stars, which usually provided some comfort, were hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds. I checked the GPS. Just 10 more minutes. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a figure appeared on the side of the road. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. The headlights illuminated a man standing just outside the edge of the woods. He didn't wave for help, didn't signal that something was wrong. He just stood there watching. His eyes glistened in the beams, but his face remained shrouded in darkness. I stared at him, frozen in place. He didn't move. For what felt like an eternity, we just looked at each other until I finally forced myself to hit the gas and speed away. My hands were shaking, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting him to be running after the car. But he didn't. He just stayed there, still as a statue. My phone buzzed again. I grabbed it, expecting another message from her. But what I saw sent chills down my spine. "You're almost pine chair. Can't wait to see you." It wasn't the message that scared me, it was the fact that the timestamp was from 20 minutes ago. I had just received it, but it had been sent before I even saw the man on the road. Something wasn't right. My instincts were screaming at me to turn around, to get out of there, but I kept driving. I was so close. I finally arrived at the diner. It sat at the edge of the woods, its neon sign flickering in and out of life. The parking lot was empty, save for one car parked near the entrance. I recognized it immediately. It was hers. I pulled in, hesitating for a moment before stepping out. The air was thick, the kind that sticks to your skin and makes it hard to breathe. I made my way to the entrance, pushing the door open, and was greeted by the faint sound of a jukebox playing some old tune. The diner was empty. I called out her name, but there was no response. Just the low hum of the lights and the faint music playing in the background. I walked to the back of the diner, searching for any sign of her, but found nothing. Just empty booths and a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Then my phone buzzed again. The message was simple: "Look outside." I turned, heart racing, and peered through the diner's large windows. My car was still there, but standing next to it, in the same spot where he had been before, was the man from the road. This time he wasn't just watching, he was walking toward the diner. My heart leapt into my throat as I bolted for the back door, stumbling out into the night. I could hear footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I ran toward the woods, not knowing where I was going, just needing to get away. The trees closed in around me as the footsteps grew louder. And then silence. I stopped, panting, trying to catch my breath. When I turned around, he was gone. No footsteps, no sign of anyone following me. Just the stillness of the woods and the distant hum of the diner's neon sign. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. As I stood there, I heard a rustling in the underbrush. My heart raced again, but this time curiosity pulled me forward. I had to know what was out there. I crept toward the noise, and as I peered into the darkness, I saw a glint of something metallic, a small object half buried in the leaves. I reached down and pulled it out. It was a pendant, an intricate design that seemed oddly familiar. As I held it up to the light, a flood of memories washed over me. It belonged to her. She had worn it the last time we met, back when life was normal, back before everything changed. Panic gripped me. Why was it here? Then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed again. find me. Without thinking, I turned back toward the diner. I had to confront whatever was happening. I burst through the doors, the smell of stale coffee hitting me like a wall. The jukebox was silent now, the lights flickering ominously. I called her name again, but only silence answered. Suddenly, the front door swung open, and in walked the man. His face was obscured, but I could feel his gaze boring into me. I backed away, heart pounding. "What do you want?" I shouted, the fear giving way to anger. We stepped closer, and I realized he wasn't alone. Shadows flickered at the edges of the diner, figures emerging from the dark corners. They were all watching me, waiting. I turned to run, but they blocked the exit. So I was trapped. In that moment of despair, I recalled the pendant, and it sparked something deep within me. I had to confront this. I faced the man, demanding to know what was happening. "Where is she?" I yelled, my voice trembling. The man stepped into the light, revealing a twisted smile. "She's part of the game now," he said, his voice cold and mocking. "We've been waiting for you to come back. You were always the target." The shadows laughed softly, echoing the man's words. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It all made sense: the late-night invitation, the eerie messages. This wasn't a reunion, it was a trap. They had been watching me, luring me in, and now I was ensnared. But something in me ignited survival instinct, perhaps. I lunged toward the back door, pushing past the shadows, my adrenaline surging. They stumbled back, surprised by my sudden burst of energy. I dashed into the darkness of the woods, heart racing, breath coming in quick gasps. Branches whipped at my face as I ran, the sound of footsteps pursuing me fading into the distance. I didn't stop until I reached the road, collapsing onto the gravel, panting heavily. My car was still there, the headlights illuminating the path to safety. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking, desperate to get away. As I started the engine and sped down the highway, the dread of that night loomed in my mind. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see them chasing after me, but there was nothing, just the empty road behind. Weeks passed, and I tried to forget the horrors of that night, but the memories lingered, haunting me like a shadow. I called her family, friends, anyone who might know where she was, but there was no trace of her. It was as if she had vanished entirely. Then one night I received a text sending chills down my spine. "You can't escape the game." I never drove that road again. The woods remained dark and silent, holding secrets I could never uncover. But sometimes, when I'm out late and the road is dark, I catch a glimpse of someone standing just beyond the edge of the headlights, watching. I never stopped to look anymore. I always thought my late-night drives were a form of escape. The world felt different under the blanket of darkness, the quiet road stretching endlessly ahead of me. But that night, as I received a call from my estranged brother, the road became a path to dread rather than solace. "Meet me at the old bridge," he said, his voice shaky, barely above a whisper. "It's important." I hesitated. The bridge had been abandoned for years, a relic of our childhood and a site of whispered stories. But something in his tone tugged at me, and against my better judgment, I agreed. As I drove through the winding roads, the trees loomed tall and menacing, their branches clawing at the sky. A strange fog rolled in, enveloping the surroundings. I felt a sense of foreboding wash over me, but I brushed it aside. After all, I was simply meeting family. What could possibly go wrong? I arrived at the bridge, its silhouette barely visible through the thick fog. The wooden structure creaked ominously as I parked my car and stepped out. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. I scanned the area, expecting to see my brother emerge from the mist, but there was only silence. "Tom?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the fog. No answer. I took a hesitant step forward, the sound of my shoes crunching on the gravel echoing in the stillness. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I pressed on. Just then, I heard a sound behind me, soft and deliberate, like footsteps. I spun around, heart racing, but saw nothing in the enveloping darkness. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease. It was just my imagination. After all, I was here for my brother. Suddenly, a low whisper broke the silence, sending chills down my spine. "Help me." The voice was faint but unmistakable. It was my brother's voice, a plea laced with desperation. My heart raced, and without thinking, I sprinted toward the sound. I followed it deeper into the mist, feeling the temperature drop as I moved further from the safety of my car. The fog thickened, swirling around me, making it hard to see. Just when I thought I was lost, I stumbled into a clearing where the moonlight broke through the clouds. There, lying on the ground, was my brother, pale and trembling. Relief washed over me as I rushed to his side. "What happened?" I asked, kneeling beside him. But before he could respond, a chilling laughter echoed from the trees, sending dread coursing through me. "They'll leave him alone," I shouted into the darkness, but my voice felt hollow against the laughter that surrounded us. So my brother's eyes widened in fear. "It's too late," he rasped. "They're coming for us." Confused, I helped him to his feet, but as I did, I felt something brush against my back. I turned, but again saw nothing. My mind raced. "Who's coming? What are you talking about?" I pressed, but he looked past me, terror etched across his face. But just then I heard it, a rustling in the bushes growing louder. The laughter transformed into whispers, growing more intense. "They want you," my brother said, his voice trembling. "They always wanted you." Before I could process his words, shadowy figures emerged from the fog, their faces obscured, only their eyes glimmering in the dim light. Panic surged through me as I grabbed my brother's arm and pulled him toward the car. We needed to get out of there. But as we ran, the figures followed, their movements eerily silent. I could hear their whispers growing louder, a cacophony of voices chanting my name. "Run!" I yelled to my brother, my heart racing as we reached the car. I fumbled with the keys, desperately trying to unlock the door. Just as I did, I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder, freezing me in place. I turned to see a figure standing right behind me, its eyes hollow and void of humanity. My breath hitched in my throat. "Why did you come back?" It hissed, its voice dripping with malice. I couldn't find the words. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I had to escape, but my body refused to move. My brother pushed me aside and stood protectively in front of me. "You don't want her," he growled, stepping forward defiantly. "You want me." The figure's gaze shifted, and for a moment I thought it might be swayed. "Leave us alone," my brother shouted, but the figure only laughed, its voice echoing eerily around us. The other figures began to close in, their eyes glinting with hunger. In that moment of chaos, I finally found my voice. "Get in the car," I yelled, scrambling to open the door. My brother hesitated, still facing the advancing shadows. "Now," I screamed, urgency lacing my words. He turned and jumped into the passenger seat, just as the figures lunged forward. I slammed the door shut, heart racing. I turned the key in the ignition, praying it would start. The engine roared to life, and I threw the car into gear, racing down the road. The figures chased us, their whispers trailing behind like a ghostly echo. But as I drove faster, the fog began to lift, and the laughter faded into the night. We drove for what felt like hours, my heart still pounding. I glanced at my brother, who was staring blankly ahead, lost in thought. "What was that?" I finally asked, breaking the heavy silence. "They're the spirits of the bridge," he said quietly. "They were drawn to me, but they wanted you too. You were always the favored one." I could see the fear in his eyes as he recalled the legends we grew up with, tales of lost souls seeking vengeance. I shivered at the thought. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could protect you," he replied, shame washing over him. "But it didn't work. They were waiting for you." As we neared town, the weight of the night began to lift. The road ahead looked familiar, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us. My brother remained quiet, lost in his thoughts, while I tried to process everything. "Do you think they'll come after us again?" I asked, glancing at him. He shook his head, but his expression was grim. "They'll always be there, lurking in the shadows. You can't escape what you've done." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off. "It's over," I said, trying to convince both of us. "We're safe now." "Where?" As we pulled into town, I saw the familiar sights of home, the streetlights flickering, the houses lining the road. But the comfort of familiarity was fleeting. I glanced at my brother, who was staring blankly ahead. "You should come home with me," I suggested hesitantly. He shook his head. "I can't. They'll follow me." His voice cracked, and I could see the torment etched on his face. "I have to end this myself." "No," I protested, panic rising within me. "You can't face them alone. We can figure this out together." He turned to me, his gaze intense. "You don't understand. I've been their target for too long. It's my burden, not yours." Before I could argue further, he opened the car door and stepped out into the night. "Tom, wait." I yelled, but he walked away, the darkness swallowing him whole. I felt helpless, torn between the fear of losing him and the horror of what we had just experienced. I sat in the car, frozen, watching as he disappeared into the night. The shadows began to creep back into my mind, whispering promises of despair. I wanted to drive after him, to bring him back, but the weight of the bridge's curse loomed over me, and I knew I couldn't follow. Instead, I took a deep breath and drove away, leaving him behind. Months passed and I tried to move on. I resumed my life, but the memories haunted me, the laughter, the shadows, and the fear. I often glanced at the old bridge, half expecting to see my brother standing there waiting. One night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed. I reached for it, my heart racing. It was a message from an unknown number. "You can't escape. They're coming for you." He sat up, panic coursing through my veins. I glanced out the window and saw a figure standing by the bridge, its silhouette illuminated by the moonlight. I could feel my heart racing, terror flooding my senses. I knew then that the shadows had returned for me. But this time I was ready. Unexplainable. It was a chilly Friday evening in October when I received the unexpected text. It was from my childhood friend, Laura, who I hadn't spoken to in years. "I need to see you. Meet me at the old park." The message stirred something within me, curiosity, nostalgia, but also a deep-rooted unease. The old park had been a place of joy for us as children, but it had since fallen into disrepair, often whispered about in town as haunted. After much deliberation, I decided to take the drive. The streets were eerily quiet as I left my apartment, the dim streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. The road wound through dense trees, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I felt a chill creep down my spine, but I shrugged it off. It was just a park after all. When I finally reached the park, it was as I remembered, overgrown and forgotten, a ghost of its former self. I parked my car, the engine sputtering to silence, and stepped out. The air was heavy with the scent of damp leaves and decay. As I made my way down the cracked path, I felt the weight of the night pressing down on me. "Alara," I called out, but only silence answered. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I glanced around, noticing the shadows lurking in the corners of the park. "This is stupid," I muttered to myself. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard a soft laugh behind me. I spun around, heart racing, to see Alara standing there, her face partially obscured by shadows. "Good you came," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was relieved to see her, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "It's good to see you," I replied, forcing a smile. "But why here? It's late." "I needed to talk," she said, her eyes flickering with a mix of emotions. "There's something you need to know." Before I could respond, she grabbed my hand and pulled me deeper into the park. The moonlight barely penetrated the thick foliage, and the air grew heavier with each step. I felt an instinctual urge to pull away, but curiosity held me captive. We reached a small clearing where the remnants of an old swing set creaked softly in the breeze. Alara turned to me, her expression serious. "I've been seeing things, shadows. They follow me. They want me." Her voice trembled with fear. "What do you mean?" I asked, unnerved. "They came to me last week. I thought it was just my imagination, but I can't shake it. They're real, and they're coming for you too," she said, her eyes wide with terror. "Are you sure? Maybe you're just stressed," I suggested, but I felt the doubt creeping in. "No, you have to believe me. We need to leave this place," she insisted, glancing around, as if the shadows were already closing in. Before I could respond, the wind picked up and the shadows around us seemed to darken and swirl. Panic surged through me as I turned to leave. But Alara's grip tightened on my arm. "Not yet. You have to listen." Suddenly, I felt a chill run down my spine, as if the air had turned icy. I turned back to Alara, but she was gone. My heart raced as I scanned the clearing, but there was no sign of her. "Alara," I shouted, my voice echoing into the darkness. Then I heard it, a soft whisper, almost a song, floating through the trees. It beckoned me, luring me closer. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound, my feet moving almost of their own accord. As I ventured deeper, the shadows morphed into figures, their forms barely visible in the dim light. I felt my breath quicken, the whispers intensifying, weaving in and out of my consciousness. "Join us," they chanted, their voices like a haunting lullaby. "Get away from me," I yelled, my voice cracking with fear. But the shadows advanced, swirling around me, pulling me closer to the ground. I stumbled back, struggling to break free, but they held me in their grip. Then, from the depths of the darkness, I saw Ilara again. Her eyes were vacant, as if something had taken hold of her. "Help me," she whispered, but the shadows enveloped her, pulling her into their depths. In a surge of adrenaline, I broke free from the shadows and turned to run. I could hear their laughter echoing behind me, chilling and taunting me. I dashed through the trees, branches clawing at my clothes, the path twisting and turning like a maze. My heart raced as I fought against the darkness that threatened to swallow me whole. Well, finally, I burst back into the clearing where I had parked my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hand shaking as I desperately tried to unlock the door. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices urging me to stay. But I couldn't. I had to escape. The car door clicked open, and I jumped inside, slamming it shut. I started the engine, the sound roaring to life, drowning out the whispers. As I backed out of the park, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the shadows gathered at the edge, watching me with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. I drove home in a daze, the adrenaline still pumping through my veins. I couldn't shake the image of Ilara, trapped in the shadows. What had happened to her? What were those things? Days turned into weeks, and I tried to return to normalcy, but the park haunted in my dreams. I received a text from Ilara's number a week later, but when I tried to reply, I found it had been disconnected. I felt a knot of dread form in my stomach. She was gone, and I was left with nothing but memories and unanswered questions. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft knock on my window. I froze, my heart pounding. I slowly turned to look, and my breath caught in my throat. There, illuminated by the moonlight, was Ilara, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. "Help me," she whispered again, her voice a mere breath. I rushed to the window, but as I reached out, she faded into the darkness. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, falling to the floor. Whispers began again, echoing in my mind. "You can't escape," they chanted. "You will join us." Desperate to rid myself of the haunting shadows, I decided to return to the park. I needed to confront whatever had taken Ilara. That night, I drove back, the road stretching ahead like a dark tunnel. The trees whispered in the wind, and I felt the weight of the darkness pressing against my soul. Arriving at the park, I stepped out of the car, the air thick with anticipation. "Ilara," I shouted into the void. "I'm here." The shadows gathered, swirling around me as I felt their presence close in. I braced myself, my heart pounding. "What do you want?" I cried, fear coursing through me. From the darkness, the figures emerged, their shapes shifting and twisting. "We should have never come back," one hissed, its voice a chilling whisper. I felt a rush of defiance. "Where is Ilara?" I demanded. "Which is ours now," it replied, a cruel smile creeping across its shadowy face. "And soon you will be too." "No," I shouted, my voice echoing in the night. "I won't let you take me." In that moment, I remembered the joy we once had in this park. I thought of our childhood, our laughter, and the bond we shared. "I'm stronger than you," I screamed, feeling a surge of power. The shadows hesitated, and I took my chance. I charged forward, breaking through their hold. "Ilara, I'm coming for you," I shouted, focusing all my energy on freeing her. Then with one final push, I reached the center of the clearing and called out her name again. "Ilara." The shadows recoiled, and in a blinding flash, I felt a warmth envelop me. The whispers turned into screams, echoing through the trees, and then silence fell. I turned to see Ilara standing before me, her face filled with relief. "You came back," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes," I replied, pulling her into a tight embrace. Together we stepped out of the park, leaving the shadows behind. Months later, we sat together, reminiscing about the night that changed everything. The park still stood as a haunted place, but we had survived. The shadows would forever lurk in the darkness, but we had learned to confront our fears together. Driving away that night had not just been an escape, it had been a journey of reclaiming our bond, that we knew we would face whatever came next, united against the darkness that once threatened to tear us apart. And if you want to see more horror stories, please like the video, share your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Stay with us, thank you, and see you in the next videos.